All right, LinkedIn says I have 7 seconds to capture your attention. I've wasted 3. Let's get to the guest of the hour. Everybody, I would love for you to meet Michael J. Lopez, author of Change and host of Top Voice Tuesdays. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I love it. I love it. And before we get a little bit too far into the hour, let me introduce to the audience members who are joining for the first time, CEO of WellPay, Cynthia Kerr. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm great. How are you? Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to have a jam-packed hour. I've got to get right to it. Michael, let me get you on center stage, put you on the hot seat. I really have to understand a little bit more. I got some of it in the pre-show. Give me a little bit of understanding of the Grand Gulf Nuclear Station engagement. So for those who don't understand change management, this is going to be really the setter off. Kick it off for us.
Sure. Yeah, this is a project. Most people understand the concept of organizational change management at a very basic level. And so if you start with that understanding, I was approached to help one of the lowest performing nuclear power stations in the United States, a place called Grand Gulf. You can actually read about this now. So there's articles that have been written about it. It's in southwestern Mississippi. There's about 100 nuclear power stations in the U.S. They were ranked like 92, let's just say bottom 10%. And without spoiling too much of the punchline, with a 4-month engagement and then another 6 months on their own, working closely with me, we took them from worst to first within the top 10%. They went from one of the poorest performing stations to really one of the shining stars of not just culture turnaround, but performance turnaround. And anyone that does change management for a living, it's all about performance, right? The goal is to get better. It's to, make more money, cut money from what you're doing, perform better, go faster, be bigger, deliver better, all of those things. And so, at a station, a nuclear power station where safety and risk are the two biggest things that you care about every single day, the stakes couldn't really be higher. And so, what we did was really build a program. Think about it as a program that turned into a movement. There's about 800 people in this station. We pulled together a cohort of about 45 people from across different functions, different ranks, from VP all the way down to technicians that are working out in the yard. And we identified a process for them to go through an experience to really identify what needs to change, what behaviors are holding us back. Most of the time when you get into a change management program, it's all about the goal, right? It's about the more money. It's about the bigger savings. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to change performance, you have to understand the inputs to performance, right? If I was going to tell you to run faster, I wouldn't just tell you to run faster. I'd understand your stride length, your start time, your flexibility, your strength. All of those things are inputs to performance. And companies are no different. Companies are just groups of people that are trying to understand what behaviors lead to better outcomes. And, part of the challenge with change is that when we obsess about an outcome, we tend to really get demotivated because it takes a while for us to really change our behavior. So we identified 5 big behavior shifts that were really subtle but dramatic, and we put them through a process to be able to help them understand that, which is what's holding me back, right? This idea that when I start to understand the behaviors that are keeping me from the best performance possible, then I become more committed to solving them. And so there's a process that we bring them through, which is really kind of a shared reflection. One of the things I write about in my book is that no two brains on planet Earth are the same. And that's true, right? We all experience reality a little bit differently. And so we go through a process of really understanding a shared reality that led to 5 big behavior shifts. Once we identify those 5 big behavior shifts, what we do is, rather than build a big plan that says, here's how we're going to change things, we actually send people out into the wild and we tell them to do 2 things: experiment and fail. It turns out that experimentation, and particularly failure, are the 2 greatest contributors to the opportunity for neuroplasticity, right? What I want you to learn how to do is test new ideas, get feedback from that, and then try again. As we went through that experience, they were recruiting other people into this movement. And what happened was there was kind of this buzz that started. Hey, something's different here. I see my leaders showing up in a different way. We're using different language. They're talking about behavior shifts that we've never heard of here. and you let that run for a while. And then what happens is 40 people become 120, 120 people become 240 and 360 and so on. And over about a period of about 6 weeks, once we identified those shifts, we had touched just about every person in that station. And what happened is the more they practiced those behaviors, the outcomes started to change, and we never had to actually set the goal. So as a demonstration, when we started this program, there's like 16 metrics that a nuclear power station uses to rate performance. 15 of those were yellow and trending down. Only one of them was green. At the end of 9 months, 15 of those were green. Only one was yellow. 10 of them were green for the first time in the history of the station. And never once did we tell them to go change those metrics. What we focused on were the behaviors that lead to better performance. And the ultimate goal of success was about every 18 months, a nuclear power station shuts offline. They take out the old fuel. They put in new fuel. It's called an outage. They're very expensive. They're very costly. They take, a good world-class station will do it in about 25 days. A really good one does it in about 30. 2 years prior to our showing up, their outage was planned for 45 days. It took them almost 70. 18 months after we worked with them, they planned it at 28 days and they hit 28 days, the first time in 2 decades that station had been sub 30 days. And so there's a lot more detail in there, but that's what a real change experience is like. Identifying the behaviors that are holding you back, giving a group of people the opportunity to practice and fail and learn and adjust, and then letting them create a movement that recruits other people into this culture change experience and letting them own that process from beginning to end. And, if you go there now, they actually talk about themselves as the new Grand Gulf. They've shifted their identity so much that they don't even identify with the people they used to be. And they've owned this new identity at this higher level of performance.
Coach, and I'm going to get to that coach thing because you have an unfair advantage over most when it comes to understanding how to get somebody from one state to the other as a coach. Sure. But I want to take a step back. We jumped right in. I had to get to the sizzle, right? So I had to set the stage, make sure people know why you're respected as an author, as a change practitioner. Cynthia, I'd love to understand, how did you all meet?
Michael and I met through a mutual connection on LinkedIn. I think proof that LinkedIn is a vast, vast place to meet other practitioners and leaders in the space. And I was always really impressed with his work. I kind of followed along on the sidelines there for a bit. So when we had the chance to speak, I was just so impressed with what he's done and what he continues to do that I thought there would be really good dialogue to be had here on the Well-Paid Leader, because so much of the work we do in compensation really involves change management. And that, much like you said, Michael, that, no two brains are alike, no two experiences are identically the same. We see that a lot when it comes to compensation and pay, that there's such a personal element that goes into it, that you're trying to balance both of having that personalized experience, but also having that universal, collective, process and program that you run. So I felt like, Chris, there was just such a wealth of knowledge in Michael's experience that we had to have him on. I don't know anyone else that's worked at a nuclear plant. So, the story alone, just felt like things that needed to be heard. But that's how we came to know each other, through the vast, vast world that is LinkedIn. And I'm super, super thankful that we did, and really thrilled that you're having this conversation with us.
Love it. Love it. Coach, I'm putting you on the spotlight. Do you mind grabbing the book behind you? I just want people to be able to see, available on Amazon. Do you mind grabbing? Make sure the audience knows what the book looks like. Don't be shy. You wrote a book. I want to see it.
Yeah, here it is. There's a big brain on the front. So this cover was designed by my chief creative officer and best friend, Brian Madling-Bayan, who's world-class. But, it felt like the right image. And this idea that, it all starts with this piece of gray matter in this black box called our skull that really designs and defines how we interact with the world. And so, over the last several years, I've just been able to compile really the available research. I'm going to set it back here just so I don't drop it. The last 5 years or so has been a real journey for me, both as a practitioner in the world of change, but I would say as an entrepreneur who's now trying to to do a couple things. Number one, I felt like the world of change management, some of what we just described, was in dire need of some fresh thinking. And it's full of really good people doing hard work who care about their clients. I just did a post on LinkedIn about this a couple hours ago, and yet I think there was some atrophy in the methodologies that were being used. Number one. Number two, I thought we needed to have a different conversation. Change is hard. And we see this in our lives in all sorts of areas, right? If it was easy, you sort of would have done it by now, right? And that's not a knock on anyone. And it's one of the reasons I leaned into the science in this conversation, because I feel like when we understand the mechanisms, right? What's happening to me at a microscopic level when I try to change? And if I can understand that, number one, I can depersonalize some of the negative self-talk that we get when we fail or when we have a setback or when we don't accomplish our goals, right? We can be pretty hard on ourselves. So if I understand the science, maybe I won't be so hard on myself. But I think more importantly, if I understand the science, I can start to leverage that. I can start to use it. I can start to direct it in the direction of my goals. And so for me, the book really became a way to give people a different conversation and a different set of tools. Companies are just groups of people. And we talked about this in the story. And there's a fundamental truth in addition to no two brains are the same. The only person you can change is yourself. The only person you will ever be able to change is yourself. And so, leaders need to understand their responsibility in leading by example. And that's why we took that cohort of 40 people, right? You don't drive change into an organization. That phrase in and of itself, scares me. When I hear that, I'm like, we're already down a bad path. What you do is you create a movement by inspirational leaders who lead by example and create curiosity in others that they want to follow and mimic and imitate, and who develop the willingness to experiment and fail and start again. That is a skill. Change is a skill that can be learned. And my hope is when people read this book that they'll get a sense of what that skill looks like and start to practice and fail and try again on their own.
All right. Coach, you just gave us an anomaly, and people will understand the coach thing. I'll get to that in the second quarter, but I got to get here. All right. So you just gave us an opportunity. Let's do this. So for many who do not know, Cynthia actually rose the ranks all the way up to vice president in the HR function of companies. And we're talking about change management. Her open was about how you would embrace change management. So I'm going to put you in a role playing option. Michael, you get to play yourself. So Cynthia, we're going to.
I don't know who I get to play here.
You have to play the role. You have to play the role, Cynthia, that I'm going to assign you. Michael gets the cool opportunity of playing himself. Being fun and engaging with this, because the audience should know some things about how change management and HR work well together. So Cynthia, you're back in the VP of HR role. Michael has just walked in. He's been hired to help lead change management. How does HR and a change management consultant from the outside, what are the first things that you ask Michael?
Well, I'm going to ask him to work with me to really assess the leadership. So before Michael comes in, we're going to have a dialogue around, maybe some of the pain points of the organization. And maybe there are certain groups at different levels of leadership that are struggling, and that I would need his expertise to really help me understand that. And before we can embark on any type of change and, desire for change, we have to understand where the breakage or the pain points are. So I would look for him to guide me through, when he meets with everyone and goes through his process. I'd look for him to give me a summary analysis of where he sees the gaps and where he says, okay, this is where I think we really need to dive in and do the change work. Because what I've found, and this is me possibly speaking out of turn, tell me if this is what you have found as well, Michael. What I found is where you assume the change will take place, oftentimes is actually not where you need to do the work. That for a lot of times our brains, because we're human and our brains are about 60,000 years out of date, we go to the right and we say, well, it must be this thing, and Michael's going to come in and fix this thing. And Michael says, well, this thing is occurring because 6 things to the left broke that you didn't even know about. And we have to go back to that. We have to go to the origin of where this happened, where this, unraveling or dissection occurred before we can get to this thing over here. And that's where an expert like Michael can really not only tell you the sequence of where things broke down, but also tell you the process of what we need to put back together. And the time, right? We live in a very instant world. I think you and I were talking about this when we connected, Michael, that we live in an instant world and we now expect leaders to be everything. That there used to be a time where you had different experiences in your life. You maybe barbecued with your neighbors on the weekends. You worked 5 days a week, but when you left work, you left work. And then maybe you felt, a deeper sense of morality and community. You were involved in your church. Like you had all these other facets of your life. Now people are showing up at work and expecting their manager to be their coach, their mentor, their counselor. We've put leaders in leadership in this space of having to do it all. And so I think that's where you're going to see experts like Michael that come in and say, okay, here's where I think we need to make this change and what that is going to entail.
I love that. So, for you all who have been an audience member, or for you all who will retain as audience members, this is the end of the first quarter. Now, interestingly, Coach here, Coach Michael, understands that I run the show based on the fact that this is a moment in time where rather than just continue to sizzle and grill that steak, we're going to let it simmer a little bit. I want to take it back. I need to get to our guest and talk a little bit about his journey. So, Michael, I keep referencing you as a coach. Let's start there so that people can understand the breadth of the human that is Michael Lopez, author and host of Top Voice Tuesday.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I love what you said, Cynthia. I've got a lot of thoughts, and so we'll come back to that because I think there's really a great conversation to be had there. You refer to me as coach, and part of that is I continue to be active in the world of sports. I played high school and college football, and continue to coach football. My son is 17. He's a really good player. You can see there's a picture of us right behind me that is him superimposed with me, my college uniform, his high school uniform. Fortunately, he's like 6'1", so that helps. He's way better than I ever was, but. Every good thing that I learned about being a teammate and a leader came from playing football, and it really has started with that. And I've been blessed. My teammates are still my brothers. My former head coach is a mentor to me, and he was one of the first people I called when I went through a life transition to start this company. And so, this fraternity, in my case of football, has just become a lifelong infrastructure of learning and growth and challenge and sacrifice and education that I simply would not be the person that I am today without that. And I still coach because it's an opportunity and an obligation, quite honestly, to give back. It's not just about spending time with my son. I get to coach him, and that's wonderful. But, I love spending time on the field. I'm still competitive. I still find those moments to get those juices going and see the field and find ways to learn and get better, but really to give back and help teach those lessons. So, that coach identity runs deep for me, and it ended up becoming a backbone for how I work with clients. And, for years as a younger professional, my first 5 years I spent working in military intelligence, another really formative experience for me. And if you've ever worked with or around the military, you understand and know the power of teams and how teams are built and designed and how they practice and perform. And for me, practice is such a big piece of performance, right? And you heard it in my story about Grand Gulf, right? It's about repetition. It's about failure. It's about adjustments. And what I found as I was moving throughout my career, there's really kind of two attributes I think that are important. Number one was this coaching mindset and having an athlete's mindset, right? This idea of getting 1% better, and this idea of always finding ways to do what I call, which is watching the tape, right? Going back and looking at an experience and saying, why did it go well? Where did it go wrong? How do I get better? What kind of adjustments do I need to make? I mean, I'm 51 years old and still learning every day in moments about how do I get just a little bit better. The second kind of theme, I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. I push boundaries. I do that for myself and because I just believe that growth can't happen unless we're willing to be uncomfortable. And so there was always this stylistic thing, I think, that came through in the way that I'd work with clients, maybe a bit more challenge oriented. This idea that we've got to push through, right? Staying the same is essentially going backwards. And so those themes have carried me through my career in different ways, and ultimately into a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, which I was there for 13 years, and a really incredible place. It's where I learned about the value of corporate culture. They're a company that gets it right, and particularly collective culture, this idea of shared accountability, which is, fits in with my life working with the military and in sports. And left there after 13 years. I turned 40 and decided I needed something new. And it was just a function of being curious and, a little bit of a troublemaker, and went in-house to a company that that's where I learned I was a consultant. We sort of sold some stuff. We bought some stuff. We did all the project work, and they said you could go into general management, and nothing sounded less interesting to me than that. I didn't want to do that, and had some former colleagues that went to Ernst & Young, and really helped them with. We were kind of merging two practices at the time. And so I took on a role of innovation and strategy, behavior change, this idea of how do we create something new and think about the future of work. We built a really successful practice around that. And so there's this other theme of always creating new things. I get bored pretty easy, so I'm always looking for ways to level up and, hey, we could do this. We could go create this. This is new. How do we go into this new space? And so I ultimately moved over to KPMG, another great company in the middle of the pandemic. And a long story there I won't bore everyone with, but a little company called Profit found me. And I'd always been kind of trying to carve out a niche in some of these bigger companies and around the world of change. And I realized ultimately while at Profit that the only way to do it was to go out on my own. And so 18 months ago, I started my own company, built around the principles of what I was talking about in my book. And at 50 years old, you're never too late to reinvent yourself. And I'm having the time of my life.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's pick back up in our role play here. So Cynthia articulated how where the human brain, we often think on the right? Like this is exactly what it is. And you're going to uncover, hey, the reason why the right decision points that we're saying are the things are because of these things that we're not seeing. Okay, so you walk in. Cynthia has a leadership team that believes they need to change going based on what they've predetermined. And you have uncovered things that are contrarian to what their thinking is. How do you work with Cynthia to help her position what really needs to happen, Michael?
Yeah, well, you said an important thing there about this idea of right-brainedness. I'm gonna shift your thinking on that a little bit. And this is in the book, but from the groundbreaking work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is she's the sort of grandmother of neuroscience these days. The first thing to understand is your brain is a prediction machine. Your brain is constantly guessing, whether you realize it or not, what's going to happen next. And it does that for really a pretty simple reason, which is to keep you alive, right? Your brain's goal is to keep all of the blood and hormones and oxygen moving in your body so that you stay alive. And the value of predictions are anticipating possible threats. Now, why that's important is that there's three of us on this call. If we all went to maybe a 30-minute training, not only would we experience that 30-minute training differently, but the guesses our brains would be making about the value, the application, the relevance of that training would be different because each of these brains in our skulls have different experiences. I can't make predictions on anything other than what I've experienced in life. And that is the inherent challenge with teams, is that all of our rightness, our correctness, our belief about what's going to happen next and what we should do is built off a set of experiences that we, by definition, cannot share with another person. And so one of the things I do with teams, I don't really work in a process. I work in phases is a better way to say that. And the first phase is about reflecting. And the value of reflecting is really quite simply, I need to get a group of people to have as much of a shared understanding of our collective reality as possible, right? And those words are important, right? Shared and collective. We are all having an experience together as a team. But our estimates and predictions about why we got here and what's necessary to move forward are all different. And the reason that we need to do that is that I need each person in that team to take individual responsibility for that collective reality. If I can line up our prediction machines, if I can line up our understanding of why we're here, then I can get you to take greater accountability for the personal changes you need to make in order to get us to where we want to go, right? And so that leads to the next phase of this process, which is called shifting. And shifting, like in the Grand Gulf story, right, we identified 5 behavior shifts. If I understand our collective reality and our prediction machines are close to lined up, pretty close, right? They're never going to be perfectly lined up, and that's good. We don't want them to be exactly lined up. Then we can identify the changes we need to make, not the goals, the changes. What shifts in behavior, shifts in attitude or belief, shifts in collaboration, whatever it may be, right? One of the things that we needed to do at Grand Gulf was moved from being a directive culture to a coaching culture. There was a lot of people who weren't learning from their superiors, right? And so we weren't transferring knowledge. If you can't transfer knowledge, then we can't distribute the workload because only a certain handful of people can actually get the work done, right? As an example. And so then we get into shifting. What are the things we need to change in order to move performance? Once we do that, then we go into really what's called adopting or practicing, like in the Grand Gulf story. I don't want to build this giant multi-month Gantt chart. I want to look at the next 30 to 45 days. And your goal is to go try these new things in alignment with the shifts that we've identified and fail, collect some data. What worked? What did people respond to? Recruit people into that process. And when we come back from that adoption phase, then we start to talk about real behavior adaptation. What's happened? What have we learned? How do we start to scale this and create a movement? One of the things I tell my clients all the time is I sort of Jedi mind trick them, which is you think we're working on one thing, but we're really working on something else. And what we're working on in that adopt phase is the skill of change, the skill of practicing, the skill of trying again, and the skill of watching the tape, right? Back to the coach analogy. What worked in that scenario and how can I apply it to greater effect later? And so, what 5 shifts we pick, it matters, but it doesn't really matter. We could pick any 5 and you'd still get better, right? And so that's how I work with teams. It's very practical. It's grounded in science. It's not esoteric. These are real changes. I'm not suggesting we sit around and just talk about our feelings. We do that too, but it's really grounded in this understanding that repetition is the key to behavior change, and we need everyone repeating behaviors in the same direction.
Love that. So, interestingly, both of you climbed the corporate ladder and near identical points jumped into this pool of entrepreneurship. Cynthia building WellPay on the data science side, Michael, you continuing to lead change. And the intersection you all had as we embark on getting close to halftime. Cynthia, now that you are in the role now of CEO, your true role now, when you have an opportunity to bring in a consultant like Michael to some of your relationships, what's the first thing that you hear that lets people know, or that would give you the indication there might need to be a shift here in the way things are done?
I think it's kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier, and I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, gentlemen, just because it actually connects to a conversation I had earlier today. But to answer your question, Chris, whenever I see someone that is anchoring fundamentally on an assumed answer or an assumed outcome without any data, and data could be feedback loop, data could be experiences, that tends to be a signal to me that we maybe need to unpack some of this. And that could be, bringing in an expert like Michael. But the part where I wanted to take us slightly off course here and ask some questions is we live in a time of a lot of knowledge and information, right? And you were talking about, Michael, about, you take the knowledge, you take the information, not you, but the recipients of your work. You go away, you test things, you learn failure, you learn new things. We're having a lot of conversations, I think, broadly in the, let's say, in the talent landscape. We see this playing out on LinkedIn, talking about how there's a lot of knowledge and information available now. But the big separation is who knows how to do what with said knowledge. can you take these 3 blocks and assemble, the building set? That's really how we distinguish, people who can take information and turn it into actionable or reactionable results. That you can go out and learn and find anything now. But it's really the Bloom's taxonomy of how you're taking that information and tethering it together and making decisions. And to your point earlier, putting new information in, right? The best computer you'll ever have is your brain. It is the most complex, most fantastic. I say that as somebody who has an AI company, right? The human brain is still the most incredible machine. And we're constantly putting inputs in that either tell us, this worked or it didn't. And I think we're attempting to move in that direction with technology as well. Training and testing, hey, this worked, hey, it didn't. When you look at your own work, your own practice, and you think about how you have worked with teams and organizations through change, how do you see technology playing a role in that to either move things forward? Or are there certain places where you say technology makes sense or it doesn't? We still need the human element to really be in that space.
It's a great question. It's a great observation. Change is not a spectator sport, right? We can learn through reading, and to your point, there's more information available than at any point in human history. But it's sort of like a geometry problem. I remember in high school, that sine is 1 over cosine or something like that, right? And your teacher would make you prove it out in a word, sort of in the word problem. And I used to get really frustrated about this and go, why if I know sine is 1 over cosine, why do I need to prove it? And he said to me, because knowing isn't enough, it's understanding, right? And so I think that first part for us is understanding the habits, the patterns, the beliefs that got your brain to where it is now. And that's really important, right? That's why this reflect phase is so critical. And I do think technology is great for that. I just read an article about a lot of, I think maybe Gen Zs using ChatGPT as a bit of a life coach, right? To kind of help them understand and reflect back. And so from that standpoint, I think technology is a great enabler to reflection, to new ideas, to new information, maybe that we didn't have access to. That being said, you can't passively experience your way into change, right? Change is a verb. It's not a noun, right? If you want to be different, you have to do different. Our brains work on repetition, and they work on the expression of physical movements across our body, right? Our brain in that way is a muscle in the same way that you sort of use it or lose it, right? And so sort of like deer in the forest, right? Deer in the forest, the trails get there because the deer walk that pattern every day. That's sort of very similar to your brain. And in order to change something about myself, I need to change that pattern out, right? I need to put a new set of inputs into that thing. And so I just tell people that, in the same way that you can't lose weight without moving, you can't change your behavior without trying, right? And that has to come with repetition and failure and all of those things. So I just don't want people to feel like, a chat experience is enough to really change you. I think it can give you the prompts for what you need to do, but you've got to be out in the wild making these adjustments in real time, in relationships, in interactions, and getting that feedback in order to change.
I love this conversation. So I'm going to take it back. We just hit halftime. All right, we got to get to the person, right? There's a professional, but there's the person. So for those who don't know the backstory, Cynthia took the entrepreneurial plunge, kind of got pushed by her partner, and we'll get Dr. Richard on in a future show to recap that. But ultimately, it's about making a decision. And in coming out of the corporate sector and making that decision, I've made it, Michael's made it, Cynthia's made it. But Michael, we don't know how you came to make it. We know you got out there 18 months ago. Let's go 19 months, right? This is the month before you made the decision. How did you come to the determination? Was it something internal in your soul? You're a change practitioner. You had to see the signs coming. What were they?
Well, I mean, very practically, the company that I was working for at the time, Profit, started to really hit some tough times. And a lot of people that they hired on, like myself, the goal was to bring in people from the Big Four, from the McKinseys of the world to go compete in the digital transformation space. that business, fell on hard times. And a lot of the folks that they brought in, the writing was sort of on the wall, right? This wasn't part of the strategy anymore. And so we all had a choice to make. And, that choice for some was a choice, for others it wasn't. And for me, it was an inflection point. Like I mentioned, I've always been a bit of a troublemaker, and I was trying to find, whether it was at Ernst & Young or KPMG, trying to find a way to be unique within this ecosystem, and create new things. But look, there's a business model there. There's certain metrics and incentives that work within that system. And so I was constantly pushing up against that culture, trying to change it from within. And somebody said to me once, they never asked you to do that, right? You're sort of jousting at windmills here, because they didn't ask you to do that. They want you to go do client work. So the light bulb went off for me. I was actually in the middle of an interview. I was sort of on the path of exiting Profit, and I was in the middle of an interview with another company, doesn't matter who they are. And it was a guy that I worked with at KPMG who had left, and we're about halfway through the interview. And he says to me, Michael, his name was Matt, he says, "Tell me how you're going to build your book of business." And I sort of stopped for a moment, and I said, "Matt, I'm going to stop us right here. I'm not going to answer this question. No offense. He's just asking me the question that he's supposed to. Perfectly fair question. I'm not going to answer this question ever again for anyone but myself. If I'm going to work this hard, I'm going to work this hard for me and go build the thing that I've been wanting to build." Quite frankly, because I was afraid. I was hiding inside big companies with the safety of a paycheck and an annual bonus, because I was too afraid to go out on my own and test my own value in the market. And so I was scared, and I did the thing that I talk about in my book, which is embracing stress, the fear of the unknown. And two people were essential in that process. The first one was my wife, who said, "This is the time. This is the time to go do the thing you've always wanted to do." And was my coach from college. He said to me one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten in my life, which is, "You still have a job. It's just different." And it fundamentally transformed for me the belief that I had this value all along. It's time to go make it happen. And so the question in my mind didn't go from if I do it, it went to how. And once I did that, it was an incredible focuser of my attention, which is something I talk about in my book, this idea of creating focus and motivation, right? And so it was really a confluence of events and moments that I think were probably a decade in the making, that just all came together at once.
Love this. So just point of clarification here, Dr. Richard Kerr has just chimed in and made sure we clarify that Cynthia really wanted to do her own thing. Sorry, Doc, I didn't mean to pseudo throw you under the bus, but you did give her the confidence needed. So she didn't necessarily get pushed out of the nest. But I want to pull back here and really talk about that. I love that story because I had that moment. Business engineer, was rising up the ranks and just got really confident. I'm going to do this for me. If all of you business units need me for this, then everybody's going to need me for this. Now, Cynthia, I want to put you on the spotlight here a little bit. I remember what it was like the first time I realized this is fundamentally different than getting hired, right? So each of us have had these careers where we've been able to move companies, short gaps in between. We just made it happen. But Cynthia, you talked about that. And Michael, I'd love to hear your story. Was it all the same? Is it that moment, Cynthia, let's describe, where you realize, hey, selling a service is quite a bit different than being hired? What was that like for you? And then Michael, I got to understand for you.
I think it's a continuous experience, that selling a service is very different than being hired. I was always fortunate that I was pretty typically hired, right? There'd be a compensation or rewards opportunity. I'd interview for it and most likely beat out other candidates for a variety of reasons. I was always told it was my witty style that helped. Go figure. Who knew? But I think that, Michael, you really made a really valid point when you said, if you're going to work this hard, you're going to do it and build the thing that you want to build. I went through a similar phase of, I feel like now's the time, right? Rich was very supportive and saying, look, I'll build whatever technology you need, I'll build, right? Like, get out there, sell, see what happens. Because I think part of it too is you look up and you're like, what's the worst that happens?
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you became a person without skill. It's not like you became a person without, labor that you could sell in the free market. And so when I went through kind of all of that, like, what am I going to be? Who am I going to be if I don't have this corporate role, corporate title? I was like, okay, well, why not? Right? And if other people can do it, why couldn't I? Right? Why not me? And it's a day-to-day thing, right? Because you're selling a service and you're talking to leaders about how they're going to think about consuming and purchasing a service versus bringing you into a business. Because I think there's that kind of connection people form with you, and they're like, I'm going to bring you into this business, I'm going to hire you, we're going to have this relationship, versus I'm paying for this service that will support my business, but it's a different look and feel than having you as my internal colleague, hire, what have you. But Chris, something you and I've talked about, and I don't know if this was your experience too, Michael, is that once you take off your corporate skin, the way the world interacts with you is different. The invitations and the dinners, and I was at a conference recently, and I said that if I ever write a book, I'm gonna call it fake titles, because or rented, not fake, rented titles, right? Because we're all wearing like a rented tuxedo, and then when you hang that tuxedo back up, it goes to whoever is next. You're not like, well, I wore that tuxedo 6 months ago. People are like, I don't care. It's a different space, and you also now have a vested interest in people consuming your services. So it's a different space, it's a different walk, and it's something I'm still adjusting to. You go somewhere and you're like, what do you mean we're not getting invites to all these dinners? And my spouse, my very analytic, data-driven spouse, reminds me, you're not going to buy their services, so they're not going to invite you to dinner. But I say that as a reference point, because it is a very real experience to go from being internal, wearing your corporate tuxedo, to now wearing your entrepreneur smock, if it were.
Love that. Michael.
Yeah,
how was your experience?
I think, Cynthia, I resonate with this concept of shedding identities, right? Which is such a big piece of the change experience, and goes back to this idea of our prediction machine brains, right? That you have a belief that in order to get to the next thing, I've got to build off the last thing. And that's true. But what you think that next thing is, I think for me, had always been grounded in this idea that I had to have a sort of W-2 job. I mean, all I ever wanted to become was a partner in a consulting firm. And I finally got there and I realized it sort of sucked, right? I was like, what is it? Doesn't do anything for me. It's not, I'm no different, right? It's sort of like turning 21 or whatever, pick a milestone where you go, what's it feel like? And you're like, it kind of feels the same. And so I think if you can shed those identities, or at least not be as attached to them, I know for me, I ended up being able to then embrace the things that I could do, but also the things that I didn't have to do anymore, right? The things like it would take a lot of money. I'm just going to say it would take a lot of money for me to go back, not because it's about the money, but it's because about the freedom of choice and experience, who I get to work with, how I design projects, how I work from home, when I work from home, where I go, who I do it with, all of those things for me. I was staring so intently at the stability of a regular job that it was only when I got to the other side and embraced the stress and uncertainty and fear and all those things of this unknown that I realized the upside was so much greater, right? But that brain I had could have never predicted that until I experienced it, right? So for me, like you, I'm still learning. It's been 18 months, and you get the highs off of, I still remember my first project and getting that first client invoice back and being like, wow, this feels so much different than getting a paycheck, right? To just a couple of weeks ago, I had a project lined up and the client got cold feet. They decided not to go forward, and you go like, oh, okay. So, it's the highs and lows, but that's the beauty of the experience for me. And every interaction, I learned something every chance I get to do something new. You mentioned the Top Voice Tuesday podcast. For me, was my commitment in 2025 was I'm just going to try this and do something new. I didn't say the only goal I had was to do 50 of them. I'm about halfway through. And so it's all about learning and growth and exploration. And, like I said, it would take a pack of wild dogs to drag me back. Maybe it'll happen. Never say never, but I'm enjoying the ride for sure.
I love that. I love that. So we're getting into that fourth quarter, right? So you're a basketball fan. This is when Michael Jordan started steaming. If you're a football fan, you don't want Peyton Manning or Tom Brady to have the ball. But you are both, all three, if we're going to use the analogous term. I want to stay here. Writing a book. It seems like the freer that you have become, the more you've been able to express who you are. You're one part persona, one part change maker, implementer, one part thought leader. It just seems like you're really, really free. I love this. The process of writing the book. How'd you get there? We haven't even talked about that. How did you get to the point where you're like, all right, I'm doing this. I'm writing a book.
I'd always wanted to. And I think I didn't really have the focus for other than writing about change, which I knew was, my expertise. But, when I started my LinkedIn journey that kind of got me to the Top Voice recognition, which was back in 2022, I had a simple goal, which is to drive a stake through the heart of the change management conversation, like I talked about, right? Not to kill it, to change it, right? To sort of be honest, right? To kind of have the no BS conversation that I thought we should have been having. And as that evolved and as I started adding to this sort of research base, and then once I started my company, because the way I work is so different, most people understand it as change management, but how I do it is so different. I felt like I needed to have a place where in one spot I could sort of tell what are the piece parts of this perspective and point of view and research that really were different. And so it kind of became almost a non-negotiable. I sort of had to do it. And so I just started, kind of building it. The funny story I tell is so in March of 2023, I got remarried. In May of 2023, I turned 50. In August of 2023, we found out my wife was expecting. In September of 2023, my mom had a massive heart attack and almost died. 3 weeks later, we found out she had stage 4 lung cancer. She's still alive. A month after that, in October, I left Profit. 3 days later, in November, I started my own company. In January of 2024, I started writing my book. In May of 24, my daughter was born. I finished the first draft in July. Finished the first year of my company end of last year, and we published in January. And it's been the best 18 months of my life, right? Without question. So it's just became, all at once, here it was. And a lot of early mornings, a lot of late nights, a lot of weekends. And it's been a great ride.
That was an incredibly terrifying, inspiring, awesome. Like that was a lot to hear. But I can tell you've done some deep introspection. I've been on the journey now for 7 years, Cynthia north of 2. And there are those pivotal date points. I lost my father to cancer in November of 2023, right before I went on stage to present at an AI conference, unexpectedly. There are those moments that you have to push through. And I know for Cynthia, one of the things, our first episode together, I asked her, I was like, hey, if your younger self could see you now, what's the one thing that you're most proud of? And I don't want to pull the tears back out, or we're going to hold there. But Cynthia, I'm going to ask you now, and Michael, now you've reflected on it. You go back to that year right out of college, Cynthia. Okay. You're sitting here now. You're doing the thing that we have to do in the age of AI. We have to use our spoken voice. There's really no way to use text-based communication to cut through the noise because AI could have authored it. But you can tell as we're speaking here, and that's why we have to make these commitments to show up on the Top Voice Tuesday, to show up on the Well-Paid Leader, to create these kind of assets. So, Cynthia, you're a year out of college. You see what you're doing now. You're building your media side of your business. What are you proudest of now?
Well, I think there's some context too, being a year out of college, and that I graduated in like the worst economy. I graduated in 2009, And so there were several years there of just constantly like scraping and crawling and trying to take, whatever job was available. Right. And which I think is actually everybody's entry point story into working professionally. Right. Like in your mind, everybody else has got these palatial internships, but really we're all just trying to scrape and crawl and get some type of professional experience that can then lead to the next. I think that, my spouse actually said this best. I'm the unconventional champion, and that there's nothing really stellar in my background that would explain why I've been successful, other than the fact that I just don't quit. I'm very gritty. When we're rejected, when someone doesn't want to work with well pay, that's fine. We just move on to the next conversation. I haven't let any of that, let's say, malware stop me, because it wasn't really an option, right? I just had to keep moving forward. And so much like you, Michael, I kind of look at it now and I say, well, all right, I'm going to go through all the highs and lows and, abyss that is entrepreneurship. But I think when looking back, there's been much scarier times, right? Versus trying something new. And so I would say, Chris, that it's the fact that I didn't give up and won't give up.
I love it. I love it. Like, I'm about to put you on the spot, but I'm going to take you back a little bit more. I'm going to take you back rather than high school. Rather than college. I'm actually going to go pre-high school. You're 8th grade. You know you're about to be good at football. You know it. You know it in your heart. It's a lot of confidence. That middle schooler who walked in and had a vision of themselves probably playing in the NFL, because that's the goal. As you would sit next to that 8th grader today, what do you think is something that absolutely stunned you, that you couldn't have seen coming, but you're so proud that you would want to tell that 8th grader, be prepared for this?
Wow. I don't know. I don't know that I ever thought I'd make it to the NFL. I'm way too small for that. But, I've always been fortunate, I think, to be surrounded by really supportive people, my family, my mom, teammates. And so I never really thought that I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do. But I guess I didn't really know what was possible. I came from pretty simple, surroundings. And so the idea of owning your own business was sort of foreign. I could never have imagined that I would be doing the job that I have now. I didn't even know that it was a job. I think the biggest thing that I reflect back on, and maybe like you, Cynthia, and I don't think you should ever discount resilience as an attribute. I have a personal belief that it is the single most important attribute we can have as people. So it's a skill, and it's a big and important skill. So good on you for having it. There were a couple times, I will say, in high school, my high school football coach told me I'd never play in college. And I remember being incredibly motivated, not to prove somebody wrong, but to prove myself right. And it's become a lesson for me to remind myself never to tell people that there are limits to them, in the way that I coach. This idea that you can't go do something, to preordain your destiny for a 16-year-old kid, to tell them what's possible, I just think is incredibly shallow and short-sighted as an adult. And so for me, I think those are lessons that I think about as I wish I just would have started earlier, maybe, of pushing some of the boundaries in ways that I did. I was a little bit safe. But every one of those experiences leads up to where I am now. And I don't know, I feel like I'm just getting started. So I think at an age where most people are starting to wind down, I feel like I'm just starting to rev up.
Love that. I love that. Let's look forward. Okay. So the vicissitudes, the ups, the downs, the challenges, the sleepless nights, I'm still glad Mother's here on this planet. All of that has had an impact on you as a human. Cynthia, we can go through the highs and lows, the move that you just completed. There's lots of different things, but ultimately, the reason why we have eyes in the front of our head is so that we can look forward. We could have been designed with eyes in the back of our head, and we'd walk up quite a bit differently, but ultimately it's because we can see forward. And so, Cynthia, we're going to open it with you. Michael, we're going to close here. What's the forward for you, Cynthia? What are you looking forward to in the future here?
Well, speaking from the space of WellPay, we're looking forward to continuing to transform the way that businesses think about and implement compensation strategy. I think as we're seeing it in pieces, right? We're seeing pay transparency, we're seeing pay explainability, we're seeing pay equity, we're seeing all of these conversations kind of happening, in pieces that are coming together. I think we're going to continue to move forward and move into a time where people have a certain level of expectation for not only how they're going to be compensated, but how they're going to be compensated for the specific jobs that they do. And so I'm looking forward to WellPay really being the partner as we pioneer that space.
I love that. I love that. Michael, I'll bring you on center stage. Looking forward. It's a lot of runway ahead of you, a lot of energy. What's next? I mean, what's coming in the future that you can see, and things that you never even thought possible, but now seem very attainable? What's going on in the future for you?
Well, the one thing I didn't leave out, I was mentioning my daughter was born. She just celebrated her 1-year birthday. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I have a 17-year-old son, a 28-year-old daughter. My wife is expecting twins in October.
Congratulations.
So that's, step one. We got to get through that. Talk about sleepless nights. That's something that we're all excited about. But, I really, I have shied away from what I call goals as nouns. You made a point, Chris, in what you said was very wise, and maybe you didn't know the science behind this idea of our eyes being in the front of our head. 60% of your brain is dedicated to the visual system, and we know through the science of motivation that our brain is at its best when it's striving, when it's chasing, when it's moving forward. And it almost doesn't matter what the goal is, just that you have something to focus on and move forward. My goal is to finish the Top Voice series this year. I made a goal to do 50. People ask me, what are you going to do with it when you're done? I'm like, I don't know. Hopefully I'll never stop. I've got some interesting projects coming up, working with clients on their hardest problems, being in the moments, being in the hard moments, in the workshops, in the conversations. Coaching my son this fall in football. It'll be my last season as a coach for a while, soaking up that experience. I remember when he was 7, the first time he put a helmet on, and now here we are a decade later. That's where I'm focused. I couldn't have imagined a year and a half ago that I'd be where I am. And so who knows what a year and a half later looks like. I just know that if I keep giving a voice to people in the platforms that I have, and keep helping clients with their biggest problems, and keep being a good dad and a good husband and a good friend, a good teammate, I'm going to enjoy the ride, and I'm going to be striving, and I'm going to be motivated for whatever comes around the corner. I'm excited that I don't know every piece that's coming. That's what makes this journey a lot of fun.
Love it. I love it. We got to stick with you. You got to close it out. The ball's in your hand. You can either throw a seam up the sideline to get us the score to win, or you kick the field goal, get us in field goal position. But we need to go ahead and let the audience know. Number one, where can they find you on the web? Number two, how can they get in touch with you? And number three, what is one golden nugget that you want to leave them with? So let's go in order. Where can they find you on the web?
My website is a great place to start, michaeljlopez.coach. All of my socials are on there. I'm sort of most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, a little bit on Facebook. And so you can follow me in all those places. There's a place there to sign up for a newsletter that I do every week, which is inspired by my book, as well as the Top Voice Tuesday podcast. That is live on LinkedIn every Tuesday. I also have a YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to watch all the past episodes and having a fun time building that. So that's all the easiest ways to reach out. You can send me a message on LinkedIn anytime you want, and it goes straight to me. I don't have an assistant who's reading all that stuff. If you're talking to me, you're talking to me. So that's really what's fun about that. In terms of the lesson, I would just hope that everybody feels inspired to try something new. I say this in the book, and my hope is for people who read it is that you believe that change isn't just possible, but it's necessary. And that's why we're here. We're the most adaptable species that has ever lived. You have a responsibility to yourself to move forward, to try new things, to fail, to make mistakes, to grow, to challenge yourself in new ways. And I hope you do that every day until it's done. And, that's my wish for everyone. That's certainly how I'm going to live my life and do my best to inspire others while I do it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Michael, for gracing us with your presence. Cynthia, for getting the time. I know you're incredibly busy. I want to thank the audience in the future tense, whether it's in the morning, in the evening, on the weekend, or during the weekday. These are the type of moments that we live for as professionals, as three of us have come together and shared portions of our story. Cynthia, I'll let you close it out. What's one nugget, one thing you want to leave the audience with? Freestyle. Let it happen.
Oh boy. Okay. The more we learn about ourselves, the better we will become. And that I think that's going to continue to propel our journey forward.
I love it. Thank you so very much. It was a pleasure and an honor, Coach Michael Lopez, Cynthia Kerr, CEO of WellPay.ai, and I'm Chris Chambers, signing off as the WellPay leader. I just tried that out for the first time, by the way. See you all.
Thank you.